Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Third Impact Anime Podcast. I am your humble host, Bill, and with me today is a very special guest. You may know this person from One Piece recaps on Twitter or his recent One Piece reviews that he's doing for Anime News Network. Or you may know him from his very good and excellent podcast, The Blade Licking Thieves. It's Grant. Hello, Grant.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Bill. You're really hyping me up here. The people are going to expect something of me.
Well, one reason why I wanted you on the podcast is, unlike the rest of my compatriots, I am a One Piece super nerd.
I see.
And I needed to talk to somebody about One Piece, and I knew from your Twitter feed and all the Robin retweets that I found the right person. So.
Yes, I too have the compulsion known as talk about One Piece all the time, and it's never quite enough.
Thank you again for being on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Whenever we have someone new on the podcast, we always like to ask them what was their first anime they watched growing up. So for you,
sure.
What was your first anime?
Well, like many, I'm not of the ancient anime breed. But I am certainly an older fan now in fandom. So I grew up in the shadow of the Cold War and VHS tapes and very low access to everything. And the first anime that I really saw that I knew was anime, right? Like, I mean, obviously we watched a lot of secondhand stuff, and there was an inkling of it, right? You know, watching, like, say I was obsessed with G-Force and Speed Racer and Voltron, and not really, of course, G-Force also Battle for the Planets and all that, but like knowing that there's something different about these things and really loving them, but I didn't. They were just cartoons to me, right? I didn't have enough knowledge or to know that it was any different than anything else, other than I was drawn to it. But I recall one night at my dad's house. It was probably some late night, some weekend over there at his house. I caught part of this. Suddenly, this cartoon comes across the screen, and it's this moody nighttime scene, and there's this guy in a wide brim black hat, and he's got this cool sword, and he's fighting monsters, and I've never seen anything like it before, even compared to these things that I was already quite familiar with, and I was just enthralled. I was like, what am I watching? What's going on? And of course, I was forced to go to bed soon after, but I scrambled through the TV guides the next day to try to figure out what it was, to discover it was Vampire Hunter D. And then, of course, some late night showing, probably on Sci-Fi, but God only knows. But through that, stumbling onto things like Saturday Anime, the anime section at my local Blockbuster, and we also had a movie gallery, and they had slightly different selections. And from there, just spiraling further out into this wide and weird fandom. So definitely Vampire Hunter D was the first time that I knew I was watching something that was very radically different from a lot of the cartoon stuff that I'd grown up on. But from there, it was anything I could get my hands on, which now you have everything, but at the time it was a real struggle to find things. A lot of stuff was secondhand, so I guess there was a lot more local taste, so to speak. It was, I lived near military bases, so some of my friends had older brothers who had recordings of stuff, and like we would watch what they had, and just random things. And it wasn't like, for example, I didn't see a Ghibli movie until I was in college. But for other people, that's like foundational text type stuff. So I guess that's the era I come from, that was much more scattered. It was much more if something was on TV, you caught it, you didn't even know what episode you were watching, you just jumped in with it, that kind of stuff. So that definitely informs my perspective quite a bit.
is that kind of the same relation you had with? I'll probably get the terminology wrong, so correct me if I am wrong. But kind of martial arts and kind of Asian action cinema.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so I'm also of an era where anime was part and parcel with things that were different from what was being offered, and so things like uh, Godzilla film, kaiju films, Daikaiju, Eiga, your Godzillas, your Gamras, also things like kung fu films and wuxia films. These are things that I would watch on reruns, or those were harder to find secondhand tapes of, but a lot of those were getting constantly in circulation. You'd have like these marathons over the weekend, and that was even younger for me. I'm probably, even 6 or 7 years old. I have very vivid memories of just like standing up on the couch watching Godzilla and Anguirus battle it out, right, with these other weird monsters, or watching Five Deadly Venoms, and just being, it didn't matter to me that the dubs were just complete scattershot. It didn't matter to me that the visual quality was super low. None of that mattered. I was just like, I'm super engaged with it. So all of those fandoms, I guess for my era, it's much more common. And in fact, it's reflected in our podcast, with Blade Licking Thieves, that anime is a facet of these other things that I enjoy that are not the sort of standard American fare media. At least it wasn't at the time. It's much more common now, obviously. But at the time, liking anime, liking Godzilla films, liking weird niche horror films, liking wuxia films, all that stuff was we were in the same kind of, I don't want to act like, oh, we were bullied and outcast. Like, that's not really what it was, but it was a weird niche media kind of space, and there was a lot of crossover too, because again, if you only liked anime, you would probably hit a limit of all the stuff you could watch. And so if you only liked, wuxia or kung fu films, there's probably a limit to what you could get your hands on. So you would run out of stuff to watch. You're always looking for that next exciting thing. So we watch a lot of those things, both singly and together. I guess that's another thing too, is the group watch experience, going over to friends' houses to watch a new anime film that we'd rented, or getting together at night and watching just kung fu flick marathons and just eating it up. So that's all those fandom elements for me were always something I enjoyed personally, but also something that I enjoyed usually in group settings. So
Yeah, because I have to thank your podcast, the Blade Licking Thieves, for getting me into kind of the Chambara martial arts
yeah.
kung fu films.
Okay.
So
What have you checked out?
I
I'm curious. What have you checked out? I love it when people say that they watch something just because we watched it. Like I eat that up.
so I, I'm a newbie,
That's
so
okay.
so forgive my lack of knowledge.
That's okay.
But
We're all learning. We're all on that journey.
but I guess my timing worked out really well because I first got into it via the Police Story movies, Police Story 1 and 2.
Excellent starts.
And I picked up the Criterion set
It's a good
that
set.
it's really good.
Yeah, Police Story.
And
Some of Jackie Chan's great. I mean, and you can see, man, you see Jackie Chan he made a quite a big splash here in the U.S. with a lot of Hollywood films, but man, there's a totally different energy to the stuff that he's doing in Hong Kong. It's night and day.
And it's just the difference in camera work and stunt and fight choreography too, which part of that reason is because Golden Harvest would allow Jackie Chan to spend all this camera footage and time to get it exactly the way he wanted, whereas if he was doing something like Shanghai Noon or the Rush Hour movies, they're like, chop chop, we gotta go,
Right.
we gotta go.
There's schedules they have to keep, whereas the work is almost, I don't want to say secondary, but you're beholden to all these schedules and committees and stuff like that. But yeah, you can see the difference in the final product. I mean, some of the polish in a visual sense might not be there in some. I mean, you might make that argument, but man, the quality difference in what you're actually seeing is just unreal. It's so good. Well, I'm glad you checked out Police Story. That's a really good frame. That's a really good series.
Yeah, and I showed it to my brother and he loved it.
Good,
Hey,
yes.
especially Police Story 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so he when he gets into something, he gets kind of focused and obsessed. So he picked up the Bruce Lee set that just got released, and
Excellent.
then he's been going to secondhand stores and getting those.
Yeah, good. You see,
Like mere.
this is it. This is it. This is the putting on hands, right? The priesthood, right? I encourage you. You encourage someone else, and that's the beauty of it. That's how it spreads. I love it. And you know, it's amazing. This is one of those things that we joke about sometimes on the podcast because we always say like, hey, welcome to our Three Nerdy Guy podcast. Today we're reviewing The Godfather, right? Like we struggle to really bring the big heat sometimes because we're afraid it's too much for us to tackle. But we've yet to do a Bruce Lee film, and I think that's criminal. But then at the same time, I always go, well, of course everyone's seen a Bruce Lee film, but these days probably not actually. And that's a real shame. It's the same. We went through it when we did the Terminator 2 pod, for example. We were like, the guys were like, everybody's seen this film, and I was like, this film is like 100 years old now. There are huge cohorts of people that have never laid eyes on this film. So
Right, like I'm a bit younger than you, and I know Bruce Lee through kind of cultural osmosis.
correct, right?
And but I had never seen any of his work and, until just recently, and there to not go too far on a tangent, but just seeing his work, it shows kind of the difference in style and his take on martial arts at the time. And I think some of his films I really love. Like Enter the Dragon is very fun.
Of course,
and,
yeah.
I'm blanking on his second movie. It's not The Big Boss. Fist of Fury.
Yeah,
I
Fist of
love
Fury.
Fist of Fury.
Excellent.
Fist of Fury was my favorite.
Excellent film. You know Bruce Lee's the man, right? He's an icon. But have you seen him? Like, have you seen the guy that's so fast they tell him to slow down so they can catch it on film? I mean, he's still in many ways looms over kind of the echoes from Bruce Lee are still here, and that's. But a lot of people haven't seen his films. Like, you're like, it's just like, Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's like an old action star guy, right? Like, you just know it, but have you seen his work? That kind of stuff. It's interesting to see how these cultural touchstones, like, Enter the Dragon, I probably watched that film 10 times before I was 10. It just was on, and if it was on, I would watch it, and other people would be like, hey, I'm putting on Enter the Dragon. Like, okay, let's watch it. Like, it was just it was just part of the lingua franca, right? But you hit this point and then you realize 20 years have passed, 25 years have passed, and people don't watch those kind of, they don't, without some encouragement to kind of say like, this is really good, this is worth. I think personally for me, that's also part of why I never want to be the guy that's like, the new stuff is no good, the kids don't know what they're missing, because you need to engage with what's current in a sense, not just to, it's not a whole long conversion type thing, but like, what are people into? And it's still the same stuff we were into back in the, like, it's the same heat, right? You feel that energy from something, and when you engage and you say, yes, this is good, this is quality, I like this, hey, I think you should also check out, I know this thing is 20 years old, or it's 30 years old, or even it's 10 years old, like, try it out, give it a chance, because it's the same heat, like, it's that same energy, and you'll be really amazed at how good some of that old stuff is too.
why do you think there's this kind of divide between anime fans and kind of martial arts fans? Because you think in your generation, uh, not to make you sound like an old man, but
Oh,
in
I
your
mean,
time,
I am though.
like you were saying, like it was more intertwined, whereas now they're kind of separated.
But even that, that's it's all perspective, I think. Because on the one hand, that was definitely more common, right? Like we had Daryl Surratt from Anime World on, who's your listeners probably know better than me. We had him on the pod one time, and we were having this conversation. It's the same thing. He same wavelength. We were all into all this same stuff together. These were all interwoven. Like, of course you watched anime, of course you watch martial arts, of course you watch kaiju films, but that was probably just the spaces we were in. Again, probably really, dude heavy spaces that liked all that kind of stuff. Which not to say that women and other folks would not also enjoy it, but there were certain people driving certain conversations in our little bubbles. But there were a whole other, like there's whole other stretches of stuff that I had no access. Like no one I knew had Ranma 1/2 or had ever seen Ranma 1/2. I knew it again through reading, because you would get an anime magazine or you'd find an anime, like a GeoCity site that was a shrine. You're like, oh, anime stuff, I gotta check it out. And you'd read episode. I used to just pour over episode descriptions because I couldn't actually see stuff, and so I knew about some stuff secondhand. But Ranma 1/2 or Meisani Koku and all this stuff is like cultural touchstones to whole other groups that may not have also watched all those same things. Like they had a whole different. These other little subcultures had their own set of foundational texts that may or may not have any overlap with mine, right? So it definitely was the bubbles I was in, for one thing. I think the other thing too is that access. We in a lot of senses we won the access war, at least here in the United States, particularly, right? Like although tokusatsu and kung fu films and stuff we're still struggling in a lot of spaces there. Anime wise, we've kind of won. Like we have simulcasting and simulpumping, and it's everywhere, man, and it's just all over the place. So that's we don't get that limited stream of content anymore. We don't get a couple of shows every year, and you can pretty much, like, if you wanted to watch everything, you probably could. Now it's just like everything, like 200 shows a year. Like it's outrageous. Like you can't even keep up with the things you want to keep up with, let alone all of it. So there's this huge volume of work, and I mean, imagine we're all keeping up with what, 1 to 5 things at a time, maybe. And your friends are saying, hey, yeah, maybe. And like friends like, hey, check this out. Hey, check this out. And you got other stuff. You got jobs. You got responsibilities. All that kind of stuff. And we're all under the gun because, the world's just upside down. So like the fear of having to learn this whole other set of tropes, this whole other set of expectations, it takes kind of it takes some RAM. It takes some memory, right? To kind of, okay, I'm starting this whole new thing, right? So you have to enter these new spaces, and there's less guidance. There's just less people out there that can help guide you through martial arts and wuxia and kaiju films and stuff. There's just not. There's even smaller niches within, but they have just as much. Like there's hundreds of films and tons of all this stuff, and so you have less guidance. It's more content in a content saturated environment. How do you have time to get to it all? And if you say, hey, I'm going to check out some martial arts stuff and watch 2 movies, then you're going to feel like, oh, well, I didn't really watch enough, and people are going to think I just gave up on it. There's all those like social expectations about what you watch and what you read. So you don't want to be known as the person who watched 3 things and then just gave it up. Like nobody wants to feel that way, right? So I think there's just an issue of like, there's just so much already. It's a whole other thing. Like I got to do this whole other set of things. And even, again, where do I start? For me, as someone who grew up watching these films and enjoying this stuff and just, consuming it like wild, I know I can, I've got 6 films in my back pocket. I can throw them right at you, easy to get to, whatever. But, like, where do I start with this stuff? There's so much. Right. And you think, okay, well, it's just so, and if you've only experienced, say, again, if you don't know what you don't know the difference in tone and execution that these films can have. You think, well, I've seen action movies. Like, what's another action movie, right? Like, who cares? But, until you see Jackie Chan in Police Story jump down like a 7-story fire pole, basically, and risk his life on camera. Like, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe he's still with us, type thing. Or, until you see the impact something like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon can have visually and thematically and in the choreography. Like, you don't know what you don't know. So I think it's that huge just barrier of just getting started and getting into it and even knowing where to go, because there's just so much out there now. There's a ton. There's just too much.
Yeah.
There's too much.
I think it's a mixture of three things. Like you said, just the avalanche of content that just comes at our faces every single day. We're just like, okay, just slow down. I only have so much time in the day. And I, like you said, whereas with anime, we've had a cornucopia of access with services like Crunchyroll or Retro Crush. Martial arts and kung fu and like Sentai shows, it's been kind of slowly eking out, and it's been a much harder battle because they've been stuck in like horrible contract deals that are lasting till the end of time with like the whatever shell of Miramax is alive today, or Saban with his the horrible contract he signed with Toei. Well, good for him, bad for us.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's part of the reason. And until recently, like Criterion has been I think been pushing slightly with getting the first two Police Story films out. I thought was pretty big.
Yeah, Criterion. And I think that's also really helped too in a like kind of a legitimacy sense. And this is a weird space. Anime. I mean, you see it sometimes with people like, oh, I was bullied for liking anime or whatever, and whether that's true or not, or people are just exaggerating. Who knows? But anime definitely is it creates this sort of common language, and it creates this sort of little subculture where people are kind of exchanging, and there's also more of a sense of like legitimacy in some ways, because you can really, I mean, American animation has come leaps and bounds. I mean, truthfully, the difference in some of the stuff that's going on right now compared to when I was growing up, and the cartoons that we had to watch, and the cartoons that I did watch tons of, a lot of that Hanna-Barbera stuff or and what have you, but which, no offense to that, because I love some of that stuff too, but the comparisons are a little less stark, I think. But right. Even still, there's some kind of, I guess, artistic legitimacy aura that anime has. Like, well, anime is special, right? Like, there's that kind of feeling to it. I don't quite know if kaiju films and martial arts films have really ever escaped the sort of albatross of bad dubbing and low quality, these sort of stereotypes that also afflicted anime for a long time too. Like, I mean, look, some of those early anime dubs were wild, right?
Right, like if you go back to like Garzy's Wing,
right, or like the original, the dub for I don't know if you've heard it. There was a release for Do You Remember Love on VHS, and I have it, and it's wow, it is something else.
Right,
like just incredible. So I don't think martial arts films or kaiju films have really left some of that this is like corny, cheesy, poorly done, like those stereotypes that are there, whereas anime has gotten a little bit more kind of cultural coin in terms of like, oh, this is art, the visuals are so expressive, you have stuff like this clear, like visually it clearly knocks anything else out of the water, so even if it's a little weird, like there's a little more of a kind of like art sensibility to it, right? Whether that's earned or not, which I think it is largely, but you know what I mean? Like it has that special sauce in it that, comparatively nothing else has. But these martial arts and kung fu, you still see kind of like parody works and stuff where people are moving their mouths and they're doing bad dubbing on purpose, and like Kung Pao or whatever, like that kind of stuff. Like
they're doing the Bruce Lee yells.
Right. You still see that kind of lampooning of these things as low quality and poorly done, which I think is very unfair. So I think it hasn't really broken away from that yet. But things like the Criterion Collection with Police Story or Dragon Gate Inn, or they just released the entire the Showa collection for Godzilla, and in getting these films in their original Japanese, which you've never had before, and like that, especially the Showa Godzilla one, because I think it was a Criterion's. It was a big release for them. Was it?
It was their 1000th
1,000.
release.
Okay, I knew it was a nice round number, but these are big releases and they're getting like really big showcases, and I think it's adding, and you're seeing like with Shin Godzilla, we saw it a little bit too. We're getting a little bit more of that air of like, actually, this stuff is not always this quote unquote poor quality, corny stuff. Like we're starting to get a whiff of that legitimacy coming our way, and I don't know if that's translated out into the popular culture yet per se, but it's good to see those movements, because that's part of it. Is you have to open people's eyes a little bit and be like, no, you need to pay attention. And I think too, even though anime also has this problem where people think it's just like action adventuring, everyone thinks it's just Dragon Ball laser fighting or whatever, when we know it's a medium that can tell a wide range of stories and have a wide range of thematics. And obviously those of us who get into it, you start to realize, okay, yeah, it can do a whole lot of things. But there is a perception, because Kung Fu and Wuxia particularly are at least a lot of the films involve a lot of fighting. They're action movies in that sense, but when we think of action movies, we think of they're supposed to be these kind of like roller coaster like experiences with explosions. There's not a lot of thinking. You're just kind of like, woo, it's the latest Marvel, it's the 7th Marvel movie this year or whatever, right? You hop in, keep your hands and feet inside the vehicle, here we go, please exit through the gift shop. Like, it's not really thought of as a people, I guess what people don't understand, or they have been trained not to consider, how fighting and how the sort of physical expression of conflict can be another form of storytelling, can be another form of character expression. And then on top of that, the heavier themes with tragedy and loyalty and filial piety and all these other elements that are in play, they don't come to it expecting something like Hero or House of Flying Daggers or Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Like, they don't think to meditate on the other elements that are going on in these works. It's just like a dumb action movie, right? And then either they're impressed just with the action and they're sort of trained not to think much about the rest of the stuff because it's just filler, or if the action isn't necessarily up to these like high level of the sort of the Jackie Chan hijinks and what have you, then it must be bad because that's all it is an action movie. Whereas something like, say, we reviewed One Armed Swordsman a few years back, and at least I think so. Maybe it was just a year, but I think it was a few years back. And that is a film that doesn't necessarily have really high quality martial. Like, if you're there for the sort of display of the actors' martial prowess, you're probably going to leave disappointed. But I think it's a really critical work. It's a foundational text in these films, and the thematics at play of the sort of futility of this whole martial lifestyle and how it all just kind of ends in tragedy and there's really no glory, and it's almost kind of sad by the end, and it's really brutal. It's a very brutal world. That is really, really important. And the film is, if you just go, oh, like this is like a martial arts film or something, I'm just here to watch some fights, you will be disappointed and you'll miss out on how quality that film is and how it's really stood up, I think. So I think those are all, that also keys into, like, as a culture, our media literacy isn't terrific, and we are keyed in to expect certain things and look for certain things, and not all of these films in these little subgenres are tuned into those same expectations. They've got different expectations, different ways of communicating ideas and all that.
Right. And I think kind of like what you're saying is when it comes to media literacy, one thing people always look to is like a canon, which has its own problems of like, what is canon, what is the best of the best. And I think when it comes to martial arts, in the United States, there's a few things that have kind of broken out into the mainstream, like you were saying, whether that be like Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan or Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which won a lot of critical acclaim when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's not really the canon for, I would say, martial arts work here in the United States for just the average Joe is rather small
Right.
or limited.
Right. And it's not that it's incorrect. Like they just go, oh, like Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee or maybe Jet Li, they might know, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe some of them have some familiarity with like maybe The Raid or some of the Ong Bak films, which are also, and like those are all, like, don't get me wrong, those are all great. But that's it. Like you just have this surface level of like, yeah, Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, maybe, take your pick on if they know anything else, and they don't. That's it. Like that's the extent of it, and that's, like you're saying, it's a shame because they don't have that groundwork laid. And I think on top of that, because so many people, it's a feedback loop. I mean, like, why do kids watch anime? Why do all of us watch? Like, because their friends are talking about it, right? Like, hey,
Right.
they look at the numbers. Like, My Hero Academia is one of the biggest things on the planet, and if everybody's watching it and reading it, you're gonna want to watch it and reading. And it's a feedback loop. The more people that watch and read, the more people watch and read. Like, that's just how it goes. You want to be part of the conversation. You don't see that kind of energy right now for these works that are more typically culturally Chinese, right? You just don't see that energy there for it. It hasn't, broken out for whatever reason, for a lot of the reasons we're describing. But there needs to be something with that kind of popular momentum, I think, to really maybe start opening up those doors.
Right. Well, hopefully, at least for me, I'm hoping that Criterion, with the success of the Bruce Lee set and Police Story, that they'll keep releasing these type of films because and give that genre kind of the prestige rub that Criterion seems to give
Yeah.
to just the general public.
Yeah, that's my hope too, and I hope to see more kind of popular breakthroughs in some ways. But there's also there's a lot of barriers there too in terms of just even in terms of culture. Like, for example, samurai are that's a whole sticky situation about perceptions versus reality and all this kind of stuff. But most American moviegoers, anime watchers, young and old, they know what a samurai is. Like, they go, oh, that's a samurai. Like, that's a term that is not unfamiliar to them. They understand, like, when someone's dressed like a samurai, when they have the mempo or the big rectangular flag on the back, right, or the katana. Like, all that stuff is part of American culture now to some degree too. It's part of our cultural lexicon. Like, we know that stuff. You don't have kind of an equivalent term or understanding of Chinese history. Now, you may, in some gamer circles, have stuff like Dynasty Warriors doing some of that work, right? Some of that,
Right.
But it's probably the extent of it, really. Like, there's no equivalent. Whereas you can, most average people are like, oh yeah, it's like a samurai thing, right? Like, in a lot of anime and manga and stuff, it has at least some of that imagery or what have you. So it's like, oh yeah, I know that already, because there have the obsession with samurai and ninjas and all that has been part of American culture for at least 30 years now, right? 2020, no, 40 years now at least, right? With the big boom in the 80s. So we're talking at least 40 years to get comfortable with, oh, that's a ninja, oh, that's a samurai, which are both borrowed words that but we don't have that equivalent sort of, we don't have that equivalent terminology or anything for Chinese terms, Chinese history, or even, there's Korean, there's a whole body of work. Even on our podcast, we try to be as broad as we can, but like, there's just a ton of like terrific Korean gangster films and stuff out there, and like, people just they don't talk about it unless they're in like really niche film circles. They don't have the cultural coin that Japanese media has.
did you, kind of as a transition, did you start the Blade Licking Thieves podcast as kind of a response of like, well, we're not really seeing anybody talk about these films. Let's let's start a podcast and talk about it, and maybe people will want to check it out.
It's actually a mix of things. So I guess the first thing is that the three of us have been friends for years. Zen and I have been friends for at least 16 years now, I guess. And Heat and I have known each other since middle school, so over 20 years now. So we're really longtime friends. We have basically grown up hanging out together, talking about stuff together, and acting up. Like that, our friendship has existed for longer than the show. And back in the early 2000s, we all worked at a GameStop together. And it was the three of us, but also a number of, basically everybody in that crew was all friends together. And we were all, just unbelievably single. So what would happen is you would go into work, you do whatever, we'd clown around, and you do the returns, and you do the game stuff. You're doing your work stuff. But as soon as you clocked out, it really didn't matter what time it was. As soon as you clocked out, we headed over to a buddy's house where he was always running films. Like we were always watching stuff like Versus and stuff like or like like Versus, or like Sleepaway Camp, like like slashers, like 70s horror flicks and stuff. Like just films were on, and we would get together on the couch and just again, as a group watch experience, we were cutting up, we were laughing, we were having pizza, and that's just what we did. That's how we spent our time. And then fast forward, over 10 years later, and we're all older now. We've moved away, but then bounced back to our hometown, and we're all of us are into podcasts sort of individually, and then we start hanging out again. We're like, hey, let's get together like we used to in the old days and watch some movies together. And we would get together, and we would talk a lot, and we would watch a movie, and then afterwards we would go out to go get something to eat, and we were talking about the film the whole time. We were talking about, oh, this shot works, and this, that, and preparing, and then I would, the idea was like, hey, we should just involve a microphone in this, because we're basically doing a podcast right now, right? So that was the kind of the first element. Our friendship existed. We talked about films anyway. Why not record it and see if other people dig that too? In part, it has to go with influences. Like there were some podcasts I really, really like: Anime World Order, Anime Nostalgia, the Kaiju Cast, like some really great podcasts that talked about works. And I think the unifying thing was, hey, these people seem like real, and this is just something they do for fun. Like this is a fun way to express yourself in fandom that I hadn't really considered before. Like recording yourself talking about stuff that you enjoy. Like that's really cool. I want to do that. So that's part of it too, being inspired by other people who had already been paving the way in the fandom. But then on top of that, I guess the I don't want to say a reaction element. Number one, I will say, and I pushed for this heavy early on, was I really felt like wuxia and kung fu flicks needed to be like that cinema needed to be represented in whatever we did, because and also kaiju films and stuff like that, because our fandom was not just anime. Like we liked all this stuff, and a lot of these shows were really, really niche. And I was like, look, we like more stuff. Like we just got done watching The Raid. Like I want to talk about that. I don't want to not talk about it. Like so we pushed for a broader purview. For better or worse, we tried to widen it up a little bit.
Well, I kind of love your story, because that's exactly my story of just my college friends and I. We would not stop talking about anime, and we said, oh, we could just get a microphone in here and record and make it a podcast. And even though we've kind of moved away and we're in different cities now, we keep that going.
That's great.
And like you, it's all about your influences. Like I was really influenced by Anime World Order. I was really influenced by Ancast.
Yeah, Ancast too. Yep.
Yeah, I was really influenced by Retronauts. If you know that video game podcast.
Yeah, I don't listen to too much Retronauts. I listen to a lot to Talking Simpsons though, which is a lot of the same crew. So really like their work a lot.
Yeah, so just those type of works of just like you said, just it sounded like friends just getting together, and just having just a really engaging and interesting conversation.
Absolutely. So like that was part of it too, and I think the thing, I wouldn't say our pod is a reaction to anything per se. I guess I will say that we tried to have a broader purview of what we review, because our interest is our interests, right? It wasn't just anime, it wasn't just kaiju or anything like that. Like it's a pretty broad net that we're casting, and we knew that was a risk, but we wanted to talk about it because we wanted to talk about it. And uh, hopefully that has borne fruit, because I think one of the interesting things about what we have done is that we've been able to, because you get into these things where if you only talk about anime and you only watch anime and or only read manga and only talk about manga, like you end up being kind of almost insular. But there is a wider world out there that also influences these works, so it's pretty interesting to talk about the 90s Gamera, like the Heisei Gamera trilogy, which has Shinji Higuchi on it doing all these special effects work, but he's also he did a lot of work with storyboarding for Evangelion, and he's actually who Shinji Ikari is named after. Like being able to draw those kinds of connections that other shows maybe, not that they can't, but because it's a little more hyper focused, there's we have I think more of a chance to see those connections that maybe you wouldn't otherwise. That's really nice. And I think hopefully what's borne out is the thing that is, if we are a reaction to anything, it's not so much I wouldn't call it a reaction. It wasn't like, people are doing it bad, like we got to do it good. That definitely was not the case. All the shows that I listened to because I love them to death. But in a sense, there was a reaction on one level. A lot of the shows that I listened to, you have a review, quote unquote, right? And the review is lots of pre-talk about how, if they've seen it or not, or their experiences with it. Lots and lots and lots of production notes, and like really, really interesting stuff, especially because a lot of the shows I listen to, AWO, Anime Nostalgia, Kaiju Cast, these folks do conventions. They get to meet creators, talk to creators, so they have a little, and we're not really con goers much. We don't have a lot of cons in our area. It's kind of banjo country around here. But also, it's just not something we do that much. So the fact that they can go to conventions, or they're just more plugged into different parts of the fandom, and it's also more their skill set, that they have all this production history and background knowledge that's really, really engaging and interesting. And that's not my skill set, so I really appreciate it, because I'm not full of all those factoids, and I'm just like, I didn't know that, I didn't know that, that's really cool. So that's really great. But then, that takes a lot of time to do all that stuff. And then by the end, the review is, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, and it's, hey, I liked it, didn't like it, this was dumb, this was cool, maybe a joke or two, boom, we're done. And I was always kind of like, where's, like, can we get a little bit more? Like, I'm really wanting to really talk about this work on a different level. And again, that's not a criticism. It's just when you have a strength, and when it takes a lot of time to unfold all that stuff, the review, it's almost, you run out of time. You want to have a manageable episode length, which we've never had in our entire lives. But so I think the primary thing is that we tried to, and again, it's not a reaction, but just we know for a fact our strength is not all those cool production trivia notes and all that stuff. Like, that's just not our thing, and it never will be. And there's definitely a school of thought where you try to act like all the things, like all the cool, like, I've heard of that, of course I know that. Like, that's not us. It's not us. But we try to really, in our reviews, really, really unpack. I mean, I like to call them an autopsy, really. It's very much a hot take type thing. We watch the film and we unpack it, but those unpacking sessions are 40 minutes to 90 minutes most episodes. Like, we really talk about a film. We talk about, like, what's the cinematography like in this film? What's the tonal, like the color tone in this film? What's the, how are the performances, and do these thematic elements exist? Do they connect? Did they support? We really try to get in there and talk about how, and does the film resonate? Like, did we feel it? Does it remind us of other works? And like really, really try to unpack it as much as we can, not because we have the expertise. In fact, it's because we don't have the expertise. It gives us more time to really get in there and kind of wrestle with the work, right? To get in the pit with it. And so that is, I think, or at least I hope, that is the legacy of the show, is to really just get in there with a work and like really wrestle with it and talk about it, because that's what we like to do. And I feel like that is At least it's more authentic to how I feel you review a work, not just, and we never have done the stars or the number, it's 15 points out of 92 or what, 3 thumbs up to thumbs, we basically just do recommend, not recommend, which is, basically thumbs up, thumbs down, Siskel and Ebert type system. That's the most we'll do, because you do have to say whether you enjoy something or not. But really try to engage with a work and really have a good conversation about it if we can. And even if I feel like even if we can't, hopefully inspire others to also spend way too much time talking about this stuff, because it's really fun, actually.
Well, as a listener, I enjoy your production notes section that you guys do, because you don't just list the names off and then previous credits. You try and give context to their strengths and a little bit of their history. Just because it's in my mind. When you did the hero episode with Daryl, I was fascinated to learn just kind of the background about Miramax and the Quentin Tarantino Presents stuff, and then the stars and the people that worked on that movie, and more context to Jet Li and how he's not really the stoic action star. He's more comedic, which is not how, when I first hear of Jet Li, I think of the more stoic, just like, I'm gonna kick your ass.
Sure.
So I love your production notes section of the podcast.
Well, good. I'm glad. Again, hopefully it's useful, because everything that we have there's no special, like, I've never gotten to interview anybody, right? Like, it's not insider knowledge, but we try to connect some dots and try to find the context that the film was made in. And this is another thing too, like, what was the budget of the work? How did it, and how does it compare to other works similarly, right? Like, talking about, sometimes we talk about, of course, if somebody reviews Akira, they're going to talk about, like, they made special paints and, it was super expensive. Like, but you know what I mean? Like, every work, I think you have to provide some context in terms of, like, what was the shooting time like? How many revisions did it go through? Just that kind of stuff, to try to really get in and prep yourself for the film and talk about the work in its own context. Like, Hero is a great example, I think. Like, Zhang Yimou, it's a really great film, but it has that, like, authoritarian bent right there at the end. And I think a lot, if you don't know the fact that, 30, 40 years prior to that, he's getting in trouble with the Chinese government for his films being a little too risque, and he doesn't get to make films anymore for a while because of it. That doesn't necessarily excuse what happens in the film if you don't like it, but it adds a different context to it. You might think, this guy's just really into this authoritarian stuff, but then you realize the stuff he was making when he was first starting out was ruffling too many feathers, and they wouldn't let him make films for a while. That adds a different context to what he's doing in Hero, and I think that's really, really important to try to wrestle with it. It informs the viewing of the work, and it's really, really important. Like, I'm all about that. The context. When is it made? And then how do you feel about it? Like, when I watched Vampire Hunter D when I was like 8, it's different than if I were to watch it right now, even though it's already something that I love. Even, the third viewing, the fourth viewing. Our own review of Akira last year, maybe, was probably one of the most important viewings of the film I've had. It was already a film I love, already a film I go to bat for, but watching it that time for the show, like, man, it hit. That's the best viewing I've had of it. And, like, talking about that, like, being honest as a viewer, like, who you are, there's the old expression, you can never step in the same river twice, right? Like, it keeps flowing.
Right.
You as a viewer also change outside, even though the work may not. But, like, your understanding of the work, or who you are as a person, or what you've experienced, or just watching a film, like, there is a definite impact, and it probably bears out in the show, where if it's my pick, I've watched the film before, I watch it again before the show, and then I watch it with the guys, right? Like, I have a different understanding than these guys this is their first time viewing it, right? Like, even understanding that and having that kind of discourse about what you understand about a work, and, like, or for example, when the table's flipped and I'm watching something for the first time that everyone else has seen a bunch, right? Like, that dynamic, I think it's important to talk about that as reviewers, and I don't hear it talked about much. Like, you'll hear people say, I love to watch this over and over and over again. But like, do we ever really wrestle with the fact that like every viewing's a little different, right? Or it's different to watch something alone versus watch something in a room. Like, we were
Right, because the context of the viewing is important. Like, let's say I'm watching a movie and I had a really crappy day.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that's going to affect how I view that movie compared to if I was in a much more upbeat, happy, positive mood.
Mm-hmm.
Or the same thing with, like you were saying, like watching Vampire Hunter D when you're young. It's going to be different from viewing that movie when you were like 10 to when you're in your late 20s or early 30s or
Right.
40s.
Right. It's different. And if you've seen it before, like even if it like the we all remember our first anime or our first long running series, when this happened. Like, the way that you feel about Dragon Ball or One Piece, somebody out there feels that way about like Black Clover or Fairy Tail, right? Because it was their first. And like I think as reviewers, we try to be honest about that on the show. Like we really try to be, and I think that's important. I hope that that's something that's more common. I doubt that we'll ever influence a lot of people because like we're always going to be a small show. I don't think we ever set out to be the weird movie pod, but we do watch some pretty niche films that aren't super common, right? But hopefully that encourages people to do that in their reviews too. That's my hope, because that was one thing that I wasn't hearing enough of, I guess I'd say. Or I would listen and be like, I want to hear, like, and this is not like I want to hear me talk about it. It was a frustration, like, I want to hear you talk about it. Like, I want to hear the reviewers on the shows that I love, who I love hearing talk about stuff. I want to hear you talk about this more. That's what I'm here for, So that was a frustration that I was like, well, maybe we could do it. Like, maybe people would like that if we did it, because I think there's an authenticity there that hopefully comes through. Like, again, we are not experts at all, and hopefully that also comes through, that we're at least honest about it, because there are shows that claim to have expertise, and by God, they've earned it. There's also shows that seem to have an area of expertise that maybe isn't earned, right? Like there's always that tug and pull, but hopefully.
Well, sorry.
Oh, go right ahead. I'm talking a lot. Jump in whenever.
No, it's just I'm really engaged with what you're saying, so I don't want to interrupt. But yeah, I think when it comes to the expertise thing, I think it can be malleable in what is the exact expertise you have. Like, for example, my friends on the podcast will view me as the One Piece expert because I've watched it all. But compared to like the people on the One Piece podcast, I think they're more. They probably have more expertise than I do because they have because their retention level on certain aspects of the franchise is much more knowledgeable than me. So levels of expertise vary from person to person, and I think just the goal, or what should be the purpose of a reviewer, is not to have an ego about it.
Sure.
Because if I have the air of, well, I think this work is trash, I think you should throw away. That just turns people off,
sure,
and makes them not want to engage. Whereas if you're just, this is what I like about it, and this is what I don't like about it, and you can take it however you want to take it.
And I think that's really important, that authenticity, and not trying to, I don't know, just because we have a pot, like, there's this view that like, I've got my little hill, and I will hand down decrees from on high, right? Or even just being conflicted about a work. I think when you have to put a number to it or put a grade to it, sometimes it's really hard to express, like, being conflicted. Like, how do you say, wow, I liked like 90% of this, but there was one part that was really integral to it that I didn't like, and it kind of changes how I feel about everything else. So, like, I don't know. It's like, okay, a good example is the little Dragon Quest thing, Your Story, right? I watched that. I was eating it up, loving it, and then there's a part right near the end that happens, and I was like, and it's like critical. It's like this recontextualizes the whole film, and I was like, and it's not like the worst thing, but I was like, oh, so that's what this is. And then it ends, and it's not bad. There's nothing wrong with it. But I was like, didn't want that, and now we've done that. Like, so, like, how do you express I'm conflicted? Like, how do you express 80 to 90% of this film is terrific, but also there's this one part that's like the sauce is too heavy, right? This one sprinkling of thing that just kind of ruins the flavor for other stuff. But
Yeah.
when I think about everything else, like, what is that, a D? Is that a C? It's hard to really quantify.
Right.
So I think having
Right. We just put grades, or people want a number because it's
right,
easier to understand.
right, and
And
I think
sorry,
there's
go ahead.
sorry, I think there is a healthy element to trying to grade things sometimes and to rank things. Like, I think part of the fun of that is acknowledging the struggle of it. Like, it's really hard to do, but I think it's hopefully our show, and that's what we try to do, is have a pretty authentic discussion about it. And really, that also takes time. So really dedicating that time and not being afraid to have a super long episode where we just ramble and talk and try to unpack a film, because it takes work. It takes time to do all that kind of stuff. And I understand why a lot of shows wouldn't do it, because it's tough.
Yeah, and I think I loved your point on Dragon Quest, because I have a similar issue with like the City Hunter franchise.
Mm.
I'm a big Lupin the Third fan,
Mm-hmm.
and I heard, oh, if you like Lupin, you'll probably like City Hunter. And I love the character design. I love the visuals. I love that he's a detective. But I hate every time when Ryo Saiba is a perv and is pretty much doing something of sexual harassment, would be thrown in jail aspect.
Right.
And that's a constant beat that happens in the show. And those tonal shifts of him being really pervy to a woman and then being serious, super serious detective, really threw me off, where after a couple episodes I couldn't keep watching the series, even though every other aspect of that show I really enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, because and like you said, with Dragon Quest, I don't think there is like this is completely bad or this is completely excellent. Like, there's levels of quality amongst each aspect of a production and of a work.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And like, it takes more time, but discussing that and like really, like, this is how I'm feeling about this work and parts of it and all that, and understanding that there's components to it and there's elements, and you know I think that's really, really important as a reviewer, and can be hard sometimes in these sort of, when you're having to put grades to it and stuff, and especially in a more truncated format. Like, the amount of words that we can spill in an hour and a half unpacking a film is a lot. Like, we can talk a long time. It can be harder to express that in just a tweet, or even just a review column on a website, like, 1,000, 2,000 words. Can you really get into the nuance, right? Like, it's tough. It's tough. And I think the podcast format, hopefully that is our strength, I think, is the reviews. That's my hope, is that's that. And hopefully that people also just enjoy listening to these three guys cut up and have fun. We seem to have, I mean, it's a small number, right? We're not pulling in the big numbers. We don't have all the endorsements, but I'm very pleased that the people who are listening are not all exactly like us, because we are, three dudes sitting on the couch talking about movies we like. There's a fear that it can become an echo chamber in a space that's just for us. But thankfully, I have, and this is all anecdotal, of course. Maybe we've driven people away, and I pray that we haven't. But I hear from a lot of folks who aren't just like us and say, we really enjoy the show. I really like the show. So I always like to joke that we are the dream of the early 2000s webcomic come alive, right? That it's just a couple of gamers on the couch or whatever. Like, it feels like that sometimes. But I hope it's a welcoming show. I really hate to give negative reviews, truthfully. I really don't like it. And I hope that the show has a positive energy and encourages people, while also being kind of authentic to how messy some of this stuff can be. Or even admitting our long-running podcast villain / rival Takashi Miike, how much I'm so desperate to enjoy his work, but there's always something. And is it the screenplay? What's going on? Admitting that even films are made by some level of committee, right? You have director, you have the screenwriter, you have the actors and actresses, you have the composer, all, and the editors, like, all that stuff. A film is not the work of just one person. And like trying to grapple with not to say whose fault, but like maybe the reason I don't like this isn't because of just the director, right? That's where we tend to hyper focus. Oh, the director did this, or oh, it's this actor or
Right.
actress.
The auteur theory is kind of very prevalent in people's minds.
It's
Of just
very
like,
and I think it limits the view of a work, especially because like you can see and seeing how creative teams move around together, or seeing what their work is like when they break up and go their separate ways and do separate solo projects. I think having that discussion is really critical and important too, and provides for some interesting. I don't know, like John Woo I love a lot of his work. John Woo is one of my favorite directors. Watching him work with, talking about sort of the connections with him, making films in China, then making films in America, then coming back and doing Red Cliff, and working with Chow Yun-fat again after this huge break. All that kind of stuff I think is really interesting and creates these interesting narratives that are fun to talk about. Oh, it's this first film to last film. I love all that kind of stuff, and I think it's really. I hope other reviewers and stuff out there, hopefully they take nothing else from our show, but hopefully they do see that and say, hey, that's good, because I also want to hear not necessarily the same opinions. I want to hear other people with different backgrounds and different experiences have those kind of long, authentic discussions about work, because they're going to see things that I just don't have the context for. My own personal viewing, no matter how open I try to be, my lived experience is always going to be different from somebody else's. And I want to hear I want to hear what somebody else thinks who has a life totally different from mine, who's had experiences totally different from mine, that kind of stuff. Like I want to hear that, because I find it just completely fascinating what people take away from a work, or what someone see. I'm sitting there with the guys, we're watching these films, when we were in the same room together before all this broke out, 2 feet away from them on the couch, and it's like we're seeing a different film sometimes. I find that really fascinating and riveting. But we're also relatively similar in age, demographics. Like, what's it like for somebody else who's, 20 years younger than us or something, or who's, a woman or someone who's LGBTQ plus? Like, how does it affect them? Like, I want to know, because I think it's really interesting and really fascinating.
well, my one other question about the podcast is, how do you pick a work to review?
Well, so this is another interesting thing. We instilled early on, this was part of, I don't know if I'd call it the genius, but there's 3 of us, so we rotate picks, which I think AWO does that as well, if memory serves. So we rotate picks, and then we've also included, it seems to be fun for people when we do other stuff, so we've included what we call a community pick in the rotation, where we let the community vote. We're also doing a thing right now to let people who have contributed to various causes in the fight for justice to do kind of a raffle pick thing, so the community's picking the next few episodes for us. But the main thing is that we wanted there to be some we didn't want to have to vote on episodes. It was just like, look, if it's Heat's pick, it's a simple rotation. It goes Heat, it goes me, it goes Zen, and then community pick, rotate. That's the standard rotation now. And the really nice thing about that is that you can subject your friends to works they otherwise would not agree to. When I famously destroyed the podcast by forcing them to sit down and watch Red Cliff parts 1 and 2, because it was my pick and we were going to watch both of them, which is like 5 hours of film. So we did a whole pre-discussion. We watched, 2.5 hour movies, and then we had a whole long discussion, and we answered Twitter questions. Like, that was a long night, let me tell you. And they normally would not have agreed, but they couldn't say no because it was my pick, darn it. So that's the fun.
That.
Yeah. So, and part of that, I'm not gonna lie, that was a long-term goal. Red Cliff is a film that I like a lot already, and I knew going into the pod, I was like, is there a way I can force other people to watch Red Cliff with me? Because it's too long. My wife doesn't want to watch it, and she doesn't necessarily enjoy, riveting 4th century China, right? Like, it's not necessarily top of her like list, and she's like, watch 5 hours of this? Like, that's not going to happen, champ. Like, and I don't blame her. It's hard to make anybody watch 5 hours of anything, but I was like, maybe if I can get the pod to work like this down the road, I can sneak it in. That was a long-term goal achieved. But that's we have a simple rotation, and we typically float like okay, for example, we just recorded Heat's episode, it's about to be mine, or we just recorded mine, it's about to be Zen's. I'm like, okay, we'll kind of like, I'm kind of thinking maybe this or this. Like, we float a couple of movies, just kind of like, this is the vibe I'm in, and we have a quick discussion, just because it's helpful to sometimes have ooh yeah, we should do that, or ooh, maybe we don't want to touch that because it's really similar to this other work we did, or sometimes it's like, this has some kind of ickier stuff in it. Maybe we don't want to have to talk about on the show. Like, like, for example, Writing Bean has come up a couple times, which is an OVA that I have a lot of fondness for. But if you've seen Writing Bean, it's really, really short. It would be it would be a third of the length of the podcast. But there's a particular scene in it that is like, whew, it is a lot. I'm like really hesitant to review it because it's like, that means we have to talk about this. Like, you can't just ignore it, right? So maybe like, I'm just really not in the mood to talk about that in 2 weeks. Not like that it's illegal to watch a film or about it, or like, how could we ever talk about it? But like, you have to wrestle with it, and it's like, man, I don't know if I'm really ready to wrestle with that. Can you pick something else, right? Like, so that we have that little discussion sometimes, but it's usually we like to give each other heads up on the show, and except for Zen, who picks his on the drive over, I think. We have to give each other a little heads up, but it's a pretty, if you really come in and say, I want us to watch this, we all have pretty similar tastes. We all know what's kind of like, what's fair game for the show. Like, we don't shy away from explicit content, but we're also not like, we're not trying to do like shock jock stuff. We're like, this week we're watching, just grindhouse type stuff that's just, offensive to everybody. We're not trying to be offensive or anything, but sometimes we do pick films that are, we kind of know the playing field, right? It's like, do you want to sit down on the couch with the guys and watch it and then have to talk about it, because you're going to have to talk about it. There's no like, whew, that was a lot, good night, everybody. But I definitely also do a lot of, in terms of my own selection, I don't know about the guys, there's a lot of what I just described, where it's just, I want to force other people to watch this with me and talk about it, and they have to. Part of it is I search through my physical media library. Like, I just look over the shelf and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to get that. But I also spend a lot of time going, ooh, that would be a good review, and like, picking up new stuff for the show. But of course, the way the rotations go, you're only getting 3 to 5 reviews in a year, really. So it's sort of silly to add new things to the list, but you can't help it. And very occasionally we'll do a special episode for something that's like hot off the presses, like, we went out and watched the 2017 Ghost in the Shell together, or we went and watched the Broly movie together when that was in theaters. Like, so every now and then we do something that's like, striking while the iron's still hot, just because, it seems like a fun thing to do. But we're not really the keeping, like, we're not an up-to-date pod. We are not like on the cutting edge, like,
neither is ours. You might laugh at this, but for me, for our podcast, I love the podcast because it pushes me to get either through my backlog, or it pushes me to explore things that I haven't explored yet. And the podcast gives me the excuse of like, well, I haven't finished Thunderbolt Fantasy Season 2, but now since we're doing a podcast episode on it, which I hope to do in the near future,
right?
That's gonna get me to get through it and finally finish Season 2. So
I definitely do that a little bit too. I mean, again, not to keep talking about the Red Cliff pod, but I really enjoyed that film, but I had tried and failed to read Romance of the Three Kingdoms a number of times in the past, but I was like, no, I need to at least have read this once to try to give myself some context for this next viewing, and hopefully help everybody else out too. So that was also kind of a life goal check off. Like, I've read one of the 4 great Chinese novels. Like, that's like, and I did that just for the pod, right? And I think it helped immensely for my viewing and for everybody else's, being able to provide at least, I mean, not all the context. I'm not a scholar. I'd only read it once, but having wrestled with it and really, by the end, like really, really enjoying it, and seeing why it's it's a cultural phenomenon for thousands of years. That was really important too. Is using I agree using the pod as an excuse to push yourself to do things and get things accomplished and check those off your list. That's I definitely do that too.
Well, I think we've gone on for a while, but I need to talk about One Piece, or else Austin, my editor and usual co-host, will be like, "But Bill, you barely talked about anime. You talked about all these martial arts movies."
The Trojan horse of One Piece. Ah, surprise! It's all wuxia and kaiju flicks in there.
So, what got you started on One Piece? Because for a lot of people, they see either the number of chapters they have to get through or the number of episodes they have to get through, and they're just like, I don't have time for that. I'm just too intimidated by the sheer size of it. No, thank you.
Sorry, I missed the first part of that. Was it how to get into, or how did I get into?
How did you get into?
Okay. Well, I mean, there's the old saying, no zealot like a convert, right? Because for a long time, I was exactly that person. I did not... One Piece was just this thing. It was the stereotypical long anime, right? And for myself, I probably took about a decade off of anime fandom, somewhere in the mid to late 2000s. I do distinctly recall it being around whenever Haruhi Suzumiya was a thing. I was just like, I began, as access expanded, I began to feel like, well, maybe this stuff isn't what it was when I was growing up, right? I went through that sort of bitter phase, and I went away for a while. And so I missed a lot of the probably early overtures of One Piece. Not that it was a huge hit over here, but a lot of the stuff like the 4Kids airing and all that kind of stuff, I just totally missed it. I totally skipped Naruto and stuff. I was still fatigued from Dragon Ball, having finished that and watched it multiple times. Like, I just can't do this again. It's all just the same fighty stuff. That's what I told myself. And then even as I returned to fandom, One Piece was just so long. There was so much of it. There's no way it isn't all just filler. Like, it's just going to be, we got to fight another weirdo this week or whatever. And then I didn't like Oda's art style. I would look at the characters and I was like, oh my God, they all look like Muppets. I don't want anything to do with that. I think on our podcast I have said as much on air, only further reddening my clown nose. But what got me into it was my Twitter habits. In about somewhere in 2017 or in and around that, I decided, hey, I think I'm ready. I'd re-entered fandom. Was hanging out with people, talking about anime and stuff, having fun. And I was like, you know what? I want to try a longer shonen again. So some close friends recommended me to watch Gintama, which and I did a thread for it because I had seen people do live tweeting a lot at the time, and people they were tweeting with a hashtag, and it would just be like a person would tweet about it, and then later they would tweet something else about it. And I was like, okay, I guess they're watching something right now, but I'm not watching that, so I don't know I don't really know what these events are in reference to. Like, it would be like wrestling or something. And then I had some other friends who were doing. I had a buddy, Yagshi, who was doing Detective Conan thread, and he was doing like multiple tweets per episode, lots and lots of pictures, lots and lots. And I was like, and it was in a thread form, and I was like, that's a really interesting way to talk about a work on Twitter. But I was like, man, that is so much work to do like multiple tweets per. I was like, what if I just did a longer show and did like one tweet per episode or something, right? Like that seems pretty manageable. And did a little hashtag just so I could keep it together. So I did the first time I did that was with Gintama. And I love Gintama. Gintama is top 5 work for me now. and in many ways is still, in my opinion, at least from my experience, better than One Piece. Like I prefer it. It's a real close run thing, and One Piece may eventually overtake it. But Gintama being a complete work, something I can look back on, and also being somewhat shorter, I guess. But I really, really love Gintama, and that was a really great experience. And in doing that thread, not only did I have a lot of fun with my friends that I already had, but I connected with a lot of new people that I didn't know before, and my thread became like a thing people would like. They expected me to watch an episode every day, and they expected me to tweet about it every day. So they'd show up and we'd talk about it, and it was like, this is really fun. It's almost like a little book club for a show. I was like, this is a really fun format, and I didn't anticipate it being this much fun. So I said, okay. I tackled Gintama, which I did the anime, and it's like 300-ish episodes. It was like 320 or 330 or something by the time I was done, and I did it in a year, trying to stick to one episode per day. And that was like my goal. I was like, by the end of 2017, I'm going to be caught up. And by early 2018, I was and I was watching the new stuff with everybody else. And it was really, really great. It was a great experience. And I was like, I want to do this again. This was really, really fun. So I asked everybody, what should I watch? And One Piece came up. And I was like, you know what? Let's try it. Right? And therefore, you sort of know the story from here. I was like, I'm just going to do the same thing I did with Gintama. I'm going to do one tweet. I'm just going to read the manga because I don't want to watch all the episodes. I was like, I'm going to read the manga. Because there was another element of me wanting to do a manga specifically, because my manga reading is really not, that's never been a huge part of my fandom. I mean, now people know me as, oh, you're the One Piece manga panel breakdown guy, right? Like that's like a thing I'm known for, which is weird. In retrospect, and this was early 2018, but I was like, I want to read more manga, so I'm gonna do the manga specifically. And the other happy accident, I think, was I was still planning on doing one. If you go back to those early tweets, I was just going to do one tweet per chapter and talk about it, like I talked about with Gintama, trying to replicate some of the discussion and stuff that I was having on Blade Licking Thieves. Not just it's awesome or it's bad, but like try to talk about the thematic elements that I liked, or the characters that I liked, or the interesting writing, or what, trying to have as much interesting discussion as you can in a single tweet. But I found myself later that day, I couldn't stop thinking about that first big punch where Luffy's punching that big like sea monster in the cheek, and his big puffy cheek and all that stuff. And I was just like, I tweeted about it, I was like, I just keep thinking about this. It's so good. And here's all the reasons why I think it's so good. And people really responded to it. And like, it got a couple hundred likes and retweets, and people were like, wow, this is a really great breakdown. And I was like, people really seem to like it when I talk about this. And I am not an artist. I don't have any training or any skill in talking about visuals or what it takes to draw something, but people seem to really resonate with how I talked about the visuals. So I kind of put it under that tweet, and I was like, what if I made this a thing? Like, I was like, people seem to respond to that. And of course, this is back when I had 700 or 800 followers, and back in 2018, and I was like, it got a lot of likes and a lot of attention. I was like, what if I did not just a tweet about how I feel about it and the thematics I like, but what if I like picked a panel or a page or something and like talked about that too? And I mean, the rest is kind of history from there. So I very much stumbled into One Piece and stumbled into community. And I think that's a really important thing too, is that my One Piece experience, like many other things that I love in my life, my One Piece experience is inherently communal. I didn't do it by myself. It wasn't just me staring down the barrel of 900 chapters. It wasn't just me versus the backlog. And I had a schedule. Every weekday, I'm posting a chapter, and eventually got up to 2 chapters a day. But every day, I'm talking about it. And talking about it in that public way, and trying to break down and trying to have a conversation about it, attracted other like-minded people quite rapidly, and like to have a conversation about it. And I will continue to say, because I feel like it's the truth, that I don't think I necessarily have some divine insight or some masterful command of art or anything like that. I don't have those qualities, but I do think that the popularity of that thread and my discussion of it shows that there was, on some level, a hunger for that kind of discussion, right? What I'm talking about, talking about things like framing, talking about things like paneling, talking about how you create pacing or tone in a comic, right? In sequential art. Not that it's never been talked about before, and not that I have any particular skill in talking about it, but that people wanted to see that discussion about a popular thing that they liked. Like, One Piece is one of the definitive pop culture elements of the planet, right? Like, it is, like, One Piece is beloved worldwide. It is the de facto popular thing. Like, One Piece, like, it's like, Batman. Like, of course you like Batman, right? Batman everywhere. You can get Batman underwear, right? But, like, One Piece is a huge thing. And so having someone try to engage on that level with it, try to talk about and try as best they could, because I gave it my best every day, try to break it down and talk about why something worked or why something resonated, or try to pick out, not, I think this is another kind of side discussion. I think when people talk about critical analysis of work in fandom, most often what that is like Easter eggs, or like secret meanings you didn't know, top 10 things you didn't know about whatever, right? Which is, to me, not, I mean, there's no inauthentic discourse, I guess. Like, if that's what you're interested in, that's great. Or also it's just kind of, I don't want to call it reading 101, but this is trying to approach it from a kind of a literary analysis standpoint, like trying to use some of those analytical tools and those hermeneutics, which include things like, which, a lot of anime and manga fans tend to be younger. They may not have had opportunities to have those kind of discussions, or maybe they have in a setting like in school or something. But who wants to talk about A Tale of Two Cities like that? Like, none of us care, right? Like, it's Shakespeare.
Right.
Like, I can't even read this. But talk about something you like how engaging and exciting it is to have those kind of authentic discussions about One Piece. Like, this is something that I like and I look forward to reading. And, I want to talk about it too, right? There's an energy there that I don't think there is when these exact same tools that I'm using, which are not, like, it's nothing new. It's just literary analysis, but are not often applied to popular works like that. And not in a public format.
Yeah, where it's maybe a popular work will be examined within academia, or maybe recently, kind of with the rise of the kind of the YouTube essayist type format. Like, I think that's kind of a relatively new thing of just, let's look at a popular work from a critical point of view. And not saying that that's like something completely new, but in kind of the popular culture.
Sure. Yeah. The essayist
kind
is kind of a
traction.
thing. And I mean, we're all aware of like the CinemaSin style approach, right? Which is just like the 100 things wrong with whatever, like, which is
right.
Again, if you want to, I'm glad that people out there exist that are paying attention on a certain level and finding things that are continuity errors and stuff. I don't have a mind for that, and I really don't have the energy for it either. And that kind of snippiness, right? But also just like, and again, I try to do, it's the same thing that I was doing on the podcast, try to authentically engage. Sometimes I'm just like, whoa, that's a really cool punch. I like when Luffy punches that guy. It's really cool. Like, having just kind of that same authentic energy for it that's really, really great and exciting. And you want to hear people enjoy a thing you enjoy. Like, that's actually lots of fun, it turns out. So I think all those elements kind of created this perfect storm, and a lot of people being open to engaging with others. I think that's the other element. Your YouTube, a YouTube video, or an article on say ANN or Crunchyroll. It's hard to have a real authentic, like, live engagement with the person talking about it. Who's
right? There's some separation.
Yeah, like, even if they do respond to you in the comments or whatever, there's going to be a couple hours, couple days delay. You can't have a huge conversation, and 2 or 3 days later, who even remembers what we were talking about, right? But like, you can, like, in real time. I was literally like, I would make a dumb, like, One Piece joke tweet. It was like me ringing the dinner bell, like, come on, y'all, we're gathering around for the One Piece reading today. So that kind of perfect storm of using a public social media element to keep it short, but also try to have some engaging discussion and really talk about, the cinematic language, if you will, of the medium, and how that, even down to things like, this is really cool lettering on this sound effect, or like, it's really interesting that they, Oda chose to do a splash page here, or that kind of stuff that I don't think. I'm not the first person to ever talk about comics that way. Clearly people think and talk about comics that way because comics exist, right? But I don't think people realize not only that you could do that, especially with popular works, and it can really enhance your enjoyment of a work, even if you've already read it, but also just how much fun it is. Like, it's really, really fun to engage with a work like that. And that energy fed back to me because I was having fun. I looked forward not just to reading it, but to talking about it with a few thousand of my closest friends every single day, right? Like that is really exciting and fun for me as the reader, and I never really felt bogged down by the work. It never, the length of it was exciting because there was always more, not anymore, but there was always more to look forward to because I was going to talk about it with my friends every day. Like that's
And,
really cool.
and it's an onion layer where you're just not looking at the surface level of just like, ooh, cool fight. You're cutting deeper and deeper into the onion of just kind of looking at the contexture of Oda's drawing, of the lettering, of the deeper emotional context that is within One Piece, especially when it gets to its flashbacks. I think for One Piece, even though it's supposed to be a shonen series, it does have depth to it, which makes it easier to do a critical analysis of it.
Absolutely, and I totally agree. You need a work that has a solid enough footing and has a solid enough foundation to support that kind of analysis. For example, I don't want to get dragged through the mud or anything, but like a lot of people, when you think about critical analysis of anime, inevitably something like Neon Genesis Evangelion comes up. Because
Right.
is that not the example of I am a smart person, I have smart things to say about anime, let's talk about Evangelion, right? Like that's just where people go. And there's an element there where again that feeds into a lot of this, like, look at all the hidden meanings, look at all this stuff from the Kabbalah, look at all this stuff from the Apocrypha, and like personally, I don't I do feel like even though I have my issues with Evangelion, I feel like it's a strong work. I feel like its tokusatsu elements, particularly its emotional dimensions, or in its cinematic language, is much more interesting to me than its religious symbolism. Like almost, I would say probably 9 times out of 10, when I was encountering somebody talking about Evangelion, they were talking about the religious symbolism and all the depth that it had. And I was like,
Right.
not only is it just kind of all over the place, it's like, wouldn't it just be cool if these aliens shot laser crosses? Like, it's clearly the impetus here. Like, there are interesting things to talk about this work, but it's like, you got to talk about the filmic language. Like, you want to talk about the cinematography. You want to talk about these character depths and like that. And I think some of the emotional stuff was there, but like, even just talking about the cinematic language of Evangelion and like Anno's impact and his eye for that is really, really keen.
Yeah, like that's for me. I'm in the exact same wavelength with you. Of just like, I don't care about the religious symbolism. I don't really care about kind of the general context of like what is the third impact and what exactly are the angels. I kind of like the more deeper kind of symbolism and context to the emotional depth of those
Sure,
characters.
yeah, the
I
emotional.
don't know,
What is it?
it's
Who
the
cares?
tokusatsu kind of.
Yeah, like who cares what the third impact really is? What does it mean for these characters? That's a really interesting discussion, right? Or, and that's the other thing that really, this is just kind of one, again, tokusatsu is the thing that's in my wheelhouse. Like, everyone's like, Evangelion, famed mecha anime, and I'm always like, this is Ultraman fan fiction, people. This is Ultraman. Like, open your eyes. Like, and so being frustrated with the discussions that are there, but having the discussion that the work can support, that's really critical. Like Evangelion, if you want to have the religious symbolism and connection discussion, that's fine. Personally, for me as an audience member, I don't think the work supports that discussion very well. There's not much there. But One Piece is a really fascinating work because of the fact that it can support so many different kinds of discussion like that. It can support geopolitical discussion. It can support emotional discussion. It can support plotting discussion and connections, right? Your Laboon to Brooks and the setups and stuff. It can support discussion of its comedic timing and comedic language. It can support the discussion about the fidelity of its fight choreography and the amazing artwork on display and the varied tone. Like, there's so much. Oda has put so much of himself into this work. I mean, he truly has given his life to make this thing. And it shows. And yes, it is for all audiences in many ways. But there's a lot of places to hang your hat and have really interesting discussions. So that's critical too, is not just having that discussion, but having that discussion about a work that can support it long term. And One Piece can. And does. I think it still continues to wow and amaze with what Oda does. And, just all of it. I'm really impressed by this. I mean, obviously nothing is perfect, but
Right.
the vastness of One Piece is its strength. You can have all those discussions. You can have those kinds of discourses about it, and it's all really rewarding and fun and exciting. And I tried to touch on as much of it as I could, but even then, even your folks that have the strengths I don't, right? The production history and the fun Easter eggs, folks that like that, like Joey Weiser from One Piece Podcast. He's also really into film, Japanese film in particular. He and the gang over at Toho Yahoo are great. I love being on their show too. But he's like really into like 70s Yakuza movies and stuff that like I don't have the context for that. But like he's showing me like, hey, when Oda designed the generals or the admirals, rather. Oh, One Piece card revoked right now. When he's designing the admirals, he's basing them off these classic 70s and 80s Yakuza actors. Like they're spitting image of these guys. I'm like, that's really cool. I had no idea, and that's really exciting and fun to learn about. And on top of that, I think further reinforces the thing I was talking about earlier, where this work is not just an anime/manga thing. Oda is influenced by so many other outside media sources. I don't know where he finds the time for it, but he's clearly also been influenced by movies and comics and books and like all sorts of stuff. Like it's there, it's right there in the work, and that's really exciting and fun to talk about those connections and how they influence a creator. I think it's really, really interesting.
Now that you're kind of up to date, and you're also doing the episode reviews for Anime News Network, is it weird to feel that you're kind of up to date? Because for me, the one frustrating thing about One Piece fandom, and maybe this is just in my own circles, I don't understand why people are like, well, why can't it be over? Why can't it be done? But I want him to take his time. I don't really care how I don't really care how long it takes.
Yeah.
that's the fun part, is the journey, not the destination. Because whatever idea you have of whatever One Piece is, it's not going to live up to your expectations at all.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I don't know. The urge for it to be done, it's certainly, I mean, it's long. On some level I get it. Like, you don't want to be the person that like, I only read the first 23 years of One Piece. You know what I mean? Like, you do want it to end. Like, you don't want to fall off it. So you'd like for it to end and for there to be some closure and for there to be payoff. And I think when it happens, none of us are going to be ready for it. But I do get the urge and the desire for it to like be done and like be finished. Like I understand that. I mean, you do at some point want to move on, but at the same time, I don't think any of us are, like, I certainly had a lot of emotions about it when I just getting caught up to everyone else, not doing One Piece every day, even though I still talk about One Piece every day, or even like watching those the Hungry Days, Bump of Chicken, like that, those like cup noodle advertisements and stuff. It's just selling cup noodles, but like, oh my gosh, watching those, it felt like a glimpse into the emotional roller coaster it's going to be when One Piece finally does end. And I'm like, I'm not ready for it. Like, I'm seriously not ready for what all that's going to entail. So I'm with you. I'm like, please, Oda, take your time. Go right ahead, man. Do your thing. And I think that also people, whether in fandom or not, really undervalue value, or sometimes maybe some people overvalue it, but most people, I think, are very unaware of or undervalue Oda's immense ability to think ahead, to plan ahead, to really put the seeds in place and to let them grow and take their time. To do a setup that literally takes 10 years of publishing to pay off, right? Like that takes a lot of forward thinking, especially with how much he's got going on in the world. But I think it also takes a lot of patience on the part of a creator. Like I know, like when I start thinking about a story I want to write, or a tale that I want to tell, right? Or when I'm running a role-playing game, when I think about an arc that I want to do, like when I think about I'm going to run the players through this, I start thinking about the cool stuff I want them to get to, and I can't wait to get them to it. I can't wait. I don't want them to do all the stuff I know I need. I got to establish the world and set up the characters and do all. Like I want them to get to the cool stuff. I'm ready for the payoff, right? Like there's that urge, right. That rush. But I don't know how he does it, but he has the ability to restrain himself and wait for those payoffs. To the point where the audience is just like, please show up. They've forgotten about it entirely. And I think that's a really impressive skill on top of all of his other many talents in telling this work. I really feel like One Piece is a work that is very unique. Like I don't think we're going to see anything else like it in our time. Like just the nature of its publication, just the quality of it. I don't think we're going to see much else like it for a while.
And also just the sheer scale of the world and just the intricacies of just all the factions and characters and and mysteries. Like there's more mysteries than just what One Piece is. It's like, well, what are the real leaders of the world government? Because the Nine Old Men like bow to this mysterious figure that we don't know who it is, or who is Dr. Vegapunk? Right. We have never met Dr. Vegapunk.
What happened in the Void Century? What's up with the poneglyphs? All that stuff, right?
Right.
And that's another thing too. It definitely pulls on. I have a background with a lot of Warhammer stuff, which is full. One of the things that definitely imprinted on me very early is a lot of the Warhammer fiction and setup. It's very vast worlds that has lots of very specific rules and lots of very specific lore, but the lore and the world building is also full of all these little question marks, like what's happening over here? We don't know. And the idea being that the players and the gamers, right, go in and fill in those gaps in their own games and their own stories with their own ideas. But the idea that you have this world full of questions that some get answered, but a lot of them just don't. A lot of them are left as mysteries for you to hook you and draw you into the world and let you make your own space in it, I think is really, really fascinating, and is why you can continue to talk about a work 23 years later and still have questions and still have ideas. It opens up the space for fan fiction and AUs and all that kind of stuff and theorizing that's really, really interesting and engaging. And I think the other thing too is that it is very much, whereas when I had not watched it, I was like, this is just another Dragon Ball thing. It's just going to be another round of weirdos punching each other, and then it's the next weirdo from next month and we fight him for 100 chapters, and then it's the next weirdo, and it's just the same. It's just this content mill, right? Like, obviously, there's no way it's really that long and there's that kind of story to tell. Well, actually, One Piece is truly a work where Oda had this story to tell, and he started small and has grown out from it, and he clearly had a pretty strong vision for it very early on, which is really impressive, too. It's not just the next weirdo they have to fight. Like it's this setting and all the rules for it and the politics and all that stuff is so fascinating. It's very much. I'm almost positive Oda has said so, or an editor has said so, that it was very much supposed to be a reaction to Dragon Ball, not necessarily in a negative sense, because part of what Toriyama did that was so brilliant was that Toriyama, in addition to all of his various excellent qualities, like his amazing character design work, his amazing ability to pace a fight and frame a scene. I mean, Toriyama's just, he makes it look so effortless. He makes it look so simple. I don't know how he does it. But he really boiled the shonen fighting shtick down to its essence. It's one weirdo versus a different looking weirdo punching each other in a wasteland. And you can just keep doing that, right? It's like you can have this wrestling match every week. In this corner it's this, in this corner it's this. Ding, ding, ding. You fight. He really boiled it down to its core essence, and it still works. Like, I still enjoy Dragon Ball. Like, that's what's brilliant about it, right? But there's not a lot
Right.
of super complex world building or deep politics, and like One Piece is clearly something else entirely. It's not trying to just repeat the cool fight between two weirdos formula. You do need to know what's going on. You can't just jump in. Like, when I started watching Dragon Ball Z, I'd never seen a lick of Dragon Ball, but I got it. Like, oh, these weirdos are fighting each other. That's cool. Like, but like, you can't jump in 300 chapters into One Piece. Like, you should not skip
No,
any of it.
you'd
You
be
have no
so
clue. You
lost.
have no clue what's going
Yeah,
on.
it'd be like if I showed a random friend of mine One Piece Stampede, they'd be like, "Who's this character?
Yeah.
What's going on? Who are they referring to?"
Right. You would be totally. No one repeats the rules or anything. Like, it's like you have to keep all this stuff. You got to keep it all in your head. And you got to really pay attention and like follow along because there's not a whole lot of recaps really. And
No.
there's a lot to miss. So and I'm sure some people have jumped in at random places and been just fine. But you are really truly rewarded for starting at chapter 1 and reading every chapter after it in order. As opposed to, again, Dragon Ball, I could probably go watch whatever's happening on Super right now and pretty much get it. Which is, again, part of its brilliance, but its weaknesses, there's not a whole lot of politics and world building there. You don't have to know much.
And for our listeners, I would say if you want to get into One Piece, do kind of similar to what not well do what I did and find a co-pilot, find a community, find someone to enjoy the work and go at your own pace. Because if you have like a co-pilot, like I was in school and watched it with my friend, and we watched episode after episode after episode because in college you have a million hours of free time.
Yeah.
But that's what kept us. That's what kept me engaged. Is just he and I just reacting to the show and getting hyped for. Oh my God! How's Luffy gonna fight Crocodile? What's his plan? Oh my God! Or us just bawling our eyes out at in the final goodbye to the Going Merry.
Oh Lord!
Yeah, like I say, find a co-pilot and go at your own pace, and that I think is the best way to approach One Piece.
Yeah, and definitely, find a co-pilot, find that community, and hook in because like it took me 2.5 years to get caught up. I set a pretty slow pace because I wanted to talk about it a certain way, and that took time. It takes more time to talk about it that way, but being connected to the community, I'd do it all over again if I could. Like, it was an incredible journey hitting these certain landmarks. Not only the excitement and energy of other people going, oh, you made it to, oh, you're about to see, all that excitement, but also the joy of like noticing something that someone else is like, I've been a fan of this for 15 years. I never thought of that before. Like that kind of back and forth with new and old, I think is really, really critical to keeping a community alive and to maintaining your enjoyment of the work. Like, I know some people have used the Shonen Jump app and hit that 100 character a day limit and just powered through the series in like a week or two. I mean, you can do that. I'm not going to tell you can't, but I think you're missing out by, you're not even tasting it at that point. You're just shoveling it in, So
right, it just becomes like candy.
Yeah.
Where you're just gobbling it up and gobbling, and then
Yeah.
you're not really understanding the context of the work.
Yeah. Or you're limiting your ability to because you're going through it so fast.
I want to know how you got the gig at Anime News Network to do the episode recaps, because for a while, I'm probably gonna say his name wrong. Sam Leach.
Sam was doing it.
Sam was doing it, and he's does the anime recap on the One Piece podcast. And then for a while there was a break, and then you came into the picture, and I was wondering just how that came to be.
So the opening was there, right? Sam was was no longer able to do it, I think, due to some real life obligations and stuff he had going on. So there was an opening. Nobody was doing it. Nobody else, I guess, had either jumped at it or wanted to. Again, One Piece is both everywhere, but also way too long for a lot of people to start. So I actually got tapped by Zach Birchie. This was a couple of months ago. He kind of reached out to me and said, "Hey, there's an opening. We're not sure if you're interested, but this would be really cool. And the team feels like you're the guy." And so I was like, "Yeah, definitely. That sounds great." There was a little bit of a kind of a low-lying period there where this pandemic thing broke out and it kind of dominated everything, and that kind of got put on the I didn't want to press and be like, "Hey, where's my column gig?" I don't want to be ungrateful.
Right.
But also with the sad news of his passing, that kind of was just like laying there for a while. But Lindsay took over as editor-in-chief, and I already had a good relationship with her, and eventually I was kind of like, "Hey, I don't I was like, I don't really know what to say, because we talked about this, but I didn't, timing wise, it would be really weird, but I also know that like no one's writing it, and I'm just saying, hey, if that's still in the cards, I'll be glad to still do it." And she was like, "No, yeah, of course." I mean, she was like, she's the one that suggested me to Zach to do it, because we're close, and she knows that I'm talking about One Piece all the time on Twitter. So it turns out talking about One Piece all the time on Twitter can eventually land you a gig writing about One Piece. But it was mainly, just like with everything else, I ran my mouth about it, and other people believed in me and gave me a shot. So that was really kind of the extent of it. Like, I don't have necessarily any particular insights, but I really enjoy talking about it, and I'm very, very blessed and glad to have the gig at ANN writing about it, because the anime is a different experience. It's fun to go back a little bit in time. I've only watched one of the movies and just a few episodes here and there, other than the stuff I've been reviewing for the show, for the column. Part of my long-term hope is to maybe start an anime thread or talk, watch the anime or something at some point in full. But I'm also going to be subjecting my co-hosts to some more One Piece movies and stuff, so we'll get there. But basically, it was just talking about One Piece on Twitter, and people liking me talking about One Piece on Twitter and wanting me to keep doing it, which is really humbling and special, and a big blessing.
And I guess I can't let you go without asking about your deep affection for our favorite historian, Nika Robin.
Yes. Number one best character, yes.
I would just, why is Nika Robin one of your favorite characters?
Yeah, that's a toughie. It's always tough with Straw Hats to pick. They're all my babies. Don't make me choose among my children. But Nika Robin is a really interesting character to me. I mean, there's a lot going on there, right? She's a world traveling assassin. She's got this unique access and like linguistic background and like undercovering secret knowledge. Like, so she's got this kind of like Indiana Jones type pulp adventurer angle, and she's learned and bookish but a bit reserved, and also has just all these great look, her with the cowboy hat and all that stuff. Just really, as soon as she's in the scene, she's easy to pick out from style wise and stuff like that. So she's got all these interesting character elements. But it was really Water 7 / Enies Lobby, which is for me
one of the best arcs in the series.
Absolutely, for me, it's my favorite arc in the series. I mean, it's hard to pick favorite because everything before it built up to it, so it couldn't exist without those things and all that. But it's definitely my favorite, and my buddy Pat's Prime on Twitter often says that it is peak shonen fighting. Like this, if you want the brass ring, if you want the gold standard for shonen fighting arc that means something, it's Water 7 / Enies Lobby. Like, that's it. That and I it's hard to argue with him. It's like, if that's not your favorite one, like, what's better than Enies Lobby? That's a tough call, right? And I think a lot of people would probably say Paramount / Marineford is really, really good too, which I agree with. And there's a similar connection there too, because of Robin's particular struggle with not having a sense of self-worth, and therefore not having having a very callous or cold feeling about her own mortality, and her use to other people only as like a tool, not really even as a person. Like that's really like that hits, like that cuts real deep. And Ace's story in Marineford is very similar, right? This not having a sense of self-worth, only finding it externally and how you can be used by others and serve others, not really having an internal sense of self-worth. So Luffy instilling that at Eni's lobby and helping her, that the famous "I want to live," like finding the will. I'm getting a little choked up talking about it, but like finding the will to live in spite of it all, finding the will to live even when you're really at your lowest point and literally the entire world is against you, but finding that was really, really powerful. And on top of that, everything in that scene with, Sogeking take down the flag and the declaration of war against the world government, all that stuff is just tremendous. But that, I really, really resonate with that story, with that sense of like, you're always running to help somebody else or do something for other people, just so that you're like, oh, I hope they like me. I hope I can find some worth in someone else, right? Like, you need to have that internal sense of self-worth, and you need to have that needs to be. It needs to come from within, is a really, really powerful message and really, really resonates strong. So like in that sense, like that, I love that character arc and I love that about her. And then on top of that, like with the rest of the Straw Hats, she's just such a complex and interesting character that, and I think you can see it every time a new chapter comes out, we get like a color splash or we get a cover story, and it's just like the Straw Hats just like hanging out and playing cards. Or maybe they're laying on their backs looking at the sky. And like the way Oda expresses their character through their body language, through what they're eating and drinking, through their clothing, like all that stuff is unique and well thought out and like really put together. And they feel like very complex and rich characters because of it. Like, Frankie just likes soda. Like that's just, just like some people in real world, they just like soda, right? Or that kind of stuff, or that Robin, she drinks coffee and she likes to read quietly, and you can see that. You just get cover stories where it's like just her sitting and reading, and maybe there's like animals or something nearby or something, or like the ones where like, okay, she's leading all the little baby ducks and it's really sweet. Like there's just so much there. These characters are so rich. It's very easy to get hooked in and get like really engrossed in a character. But I think her whole emotional arc, and I think some of that is lessened because we're in the post time skip era. We're doing we're uncovering a lot of legends, and a common complaint, and I don't disagree with it, is that the main cast doesn't necessarily get the screen time that it used to, other than say your monster trio. A lot of them get sidelined, which is a shame, and I agree. But there's also just the scope of the work and what Oda's built. It's very big, and he's only got so many pages per week. But the richness of that character is still there. You still see style evolutions, or you see the fact that she doesn't dress in the sort of like goth aunt style anymore, right? She dresses like she's going out for a day to the beach. She's wearing floral patterns, and because she's happier now, she's like a happier person, and like that kind of just little character growth stuff like that I find that just so fascinating and so engaging. So that's why she is one of my favorite characters, along with it's always it's her, Zoro, Usopp, Chopper, and Frankie. Like that's my 5-way tie for first. I can't decide, because in different ways each of them has either aspects of me or things that I think are just really resonate and are really interesting. And so, but I love all those characters, truthfully.
And I think what makes those characters and just the Straw Hat dynamic work is no one tries to change one another. They just grow to accept who they are.
Absolutely.
And learn to help each other. Like Robin in the anime can have a very kind of dark gothic sense of humor.
Yeah.
and Chopper and Usopp are like, no, don't say that. but they roll with it, or they'll give comfort to each other. Like I remember, this might have been an anime specific thing, but Brook was feeling down and not feeling like he was self-worth to the group, like he didn't contribute, and Robin came to him and said, I felt that way too, but you'll find your way, just like I did. And for me, that was a very small that's a very small moment, but a very powerful statement of just why this group stays together, because they encourage each other, they help each other, they create a family unit, and why I think just you probably feel this way too. Why we love the Straw Hat Crew.
It's that found family, the Nakama, the whole finding each other. Like you say, they're not really challenging each other to change, but they do challenge each other to grow, and that's really, really powerful and important. And just all their relationships, it's so enriching and rewarding. And like you say, it's really small moments, but they just speak volumes, and you live for those. Like, I would absolutely just read a series that was just them goofing off and day-to-day life on the ship. I would do it. I would read 1,000 more chapters of that, because that's just who those characters are, and it's all there. Like Otis put it all there. It's really, really great.
Well, Grant, I want to say thank you for coming on the podcast. Do you have anything that you would like to plug?
Sure, if you want to hear me ramble too much in other places, I'm at Grant the Thief on Twitter. You can find me there, posting all sorts of dad jokes and nonsense. You can read my review columns on A&N. I'm doing the One Piece anime review columns. I'm also reviewing Monster Girl Doctor. We all have to take one. We all have to take one for the team. Although that's a little more conflicting. It's not all bad. I don't want to just rag on it. And I do some other spot review stuff for them sometimes too, and that'll hopefully be coming out soon. You can also find my writings at yatatachi.com, which is a Japanese culture website. I do some editorials and reviews and stuff there on occasion. And you can find me on my 2 podcasts, because I'm not quite busy enough. Blade Licking Thieves, which is me and my 2 buddies reviewing films together. Eastern media particularly. We're having a good time doing those breakdowns. And also Super Senpai Podcast, where me and another buddy, Pat, we watch tokusatsu shows and we talk about them. Right now we're watching Ultraman Mabius and having a really, really good time. So that's all the various places and things that you can find me, which is a good clutch. Any of those you want to check out, be my guest, or not, whatever. It's your life. Do what you want with it.
Well, I say follow Grant on Twitter. For me, for the puns. I retweet the puns. I love the puns. I do pun alerts. It's very important. We need the puns. Keep going.
Right. Yeah, the puns. That's. I didn't. Once again, I didn't invent them, but I think people have grown accustomed to my love for them. So the groans, I love to hear them every time.
And you can find me also on Twitter at WBForeman999, where I will usually retweeting about One Piece or Lupin the Third. I also do writing on our website, thirdimpactanime.com, and hopefully some other places in the near future. So, Grant, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Let me just run my mouth the whole time. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun talking with you.
And we'll catch you on the next episode.